I am Kate Wisniewski here with the Office of Congressman Jim Renacci on July 26, 2017, interviewing David Moore, and we are going to start the interview. So, where and when were you born, David?
I was born in, I believe it was St. Anne's Hospital in Cleveland, which is no longer in existence, but I believe that's what my mother had said and sounded right. I haven't looked at my birth certificate lately, but I know I'm from Cuyahoga County, Cleveland.
Okay, and when were you born?
February 18th, 1945.
Okay, and then did you have any siblings, and what was kind of your home life like?
Typical lower class, not even middle, well, somewhere just below middle class. I had two sisters. One was born 15 months after me, and had another sister that was born 11 years after me. The older sister, to my knowledge, is still alive. We don't speak. We had a little war at my father's funeral, and it was the end of that. And my other sister died of AIDS. So,
Okay. And what occupations did your parents hold?
My dad was a steel worker at J&L Steel, and my mother was a housewife.
Okay. And then, did anyone in your family serve in the military, or were you the first?
I was the first. My 15-month younger than me sister did join the Navy, and she married some Cherokee Indian guy and got pregnant and got discharged.
Okay. So, before you entered the service, what were you doing? Were you in school?
I was in high school.
Okay.
And came home one day. I lived off of West 14th and Clark, and new cars in our neighborhood were non-existent. And when I'm walking down the street towards my house, in front of our house was a brand new, I believe it was a Plymouth, but I'm not sure, with U.S. government plates on it. And I'm going, what the heck is this, And walked in the house, and my mother was sitting at the kitchen table having a cup of coffee with a gentleman in uniform. He was in a Navy uniform. And it turned out he was somebody who tries to get you to enlist, whatever they call them. And so we chit-chatted. My mother's big concern was she did not want me to be drafted and sent to Vietnam and come home in a box, like a lot of people did.
Yeah.
And so, I talked to this gentleman. We talked at length, probably about a half hour to an hour. And the ability, I could join any branch of the service I wanted. And the Navy, I have always liked ships, so I thought, the Navy would be cool. The Army was out of the question. The Marines were out of the question. And what I did was join a Naval Reserve group. And the reason I joined them, there was a chance, my grades stunk in high school, but there was a chance that I could get a U.S. Naval Reserve appointment to Annapolis, which I thought would be really cool. And I took the physical, and I have a weak left eye. I had 20/40 vision in my left eye. And I took all their tests, and I was off on, I believe, a math test by 2 points, and it wouldn't give me 2 waivers. So the next thing was, now you're in the Navy. Ta-da! And I never went to boot camp like most people that enlist, because I was trying to get this appointment, and I ended up in Chicago, I believe it was in Chicago, to take the physicals and all this stuff for the academy. And so that served as boot camp.
Okay.
And then I came home, and I had no idea what was going on. You kind of, I was 18 years old, and they sent me orders. They asked me what I wanted to do, and I said, geez, I'd like to be in the submarine. I always thought that was fabulous. And so I got orders to New London, Connecticut, and went to submarine school. And it was interesting. I was civilian mentality. I wasn't military mentality, and it was unique. submarine school was fun, I guess. And from there I got orders I could go home on leave for, I don't know, it was 30 days or something. And they wanted to know when I was there what did I want to do in the service. And you know, I always thought the weapon thing was kind of neat. So figured, okay, you know, I'll study, you know, torpedoes and how they work and all that. And they sent me to FTG school, which is fire control gunnery, which had nothing to do with torpedoes. And that was in Bainbridge, Maryland. And mathematics was not my cup of tea in high school at all. And I had to drop out of algebra. I just didn't understand it, you know, and I went to FTG school, and the next thing you know, we're studying logarithms and use of a slide rule, and I'm going, because you had to study electronics and how that stuff worked. And it was fascinating, interesting. Bainbridge, Maryland was unique. And I ended up finally buying a car, and I would come home almost every weekend. I had a girlfriend here, and so I drive home, and I found if I brought a couple of guys with me, they pay for the gas, so that was cool. And pick them up and go back, you know, and I did that. I think I'm trying to remember how long the school was. It was 3, 4, 5 months long, something like that. And when I got out of there, I had orders to, you know, you're on leave, and we'll contact you, you know. And then my orders came, and they were to a destroyer in San Diego. And I went, wait a minute here, I'm supposed to be on a submarine. So I started making phone calls, and that's when I discovered you signed your name on a dotted line, shut up. You know, you do what they tell you, end the subject. And so I reported to the ship I was supposed to be on in San Diego, and I had never been in the ocean. Well, I had seen the ocean from the shore and stuff on vacations with the family, but you know, we got there, and you know, it was unique, and everybody on the ship was preparing to go to sea, and I thought it was rather unique that the lunch we had right before we were supposed to leave the port was really greasy pork chops. And I thought, okay, I don't know, you know, the cooks were pretty good. And then I discovered what being seasick was. And I can't even describe, you know, I thought, oh, you know, this is nonsense. And everybody was hanging over the rails, even our guts out. And it took me about 2.5 days before I got my sea legs, you know, where I could actually walk down on the ship without falling down or, you know, barfing. And the first place we hit was the Philippines. And I was low man on the totem pole in the group, so one of the jobs I was assigned was called mess cook. And basically you empty the garbage and you wash floors, you know, and I found out, yeah, that's what you do. And I didn't like it, but I had to do it. And when we got into the Philippines, after the dinner hour, we had garbage cans that held, well, they were huge, and one guy could barely carry one, you know, unless you were a bodybuilder or something. And the dumpsters that we had to dump this stuff in were really high. So you had to go up a ladder with this can. And so we had 2 ladders side by side, and one guy on each side, you know, carrying the can up and dumping it. When we got to the top and went to dump it, I looked into the dumpster, and there was a bunch of people in the dumpster fighting over the big pieces. And we would, you know, they would cook when we'd get into a port. 80% of the guys went into town, and so they had a lot of food left over. It wasn't touched or eaten or anything. And wasn't a dumpster. So, you know, the next time we had to dump the garbage, we thought, myself and another guy, that, you know, we'll call the people over and just let them pick the stuff out of our can instead of dumping it in the dumpster.
Yeah.
I almost got court-martialed for that. That was against the law, against the rules. And so we had to dump it in the dumpster. And I saw a Philippine family out in the bay on a little boat trying to catch this carcass of a dead dog. And that was their dinner. And it was like, you know, you can eat this, you know. And it was, I never realized people lived like this, you know.
Mm-hmm.
I was very sheltered here in the United States. And then we weren't in the Philippines that long, and we were supposed to go to Vietnam. And, well, yeah, we did. We did some shore bomb. We had 5-inch guns on the ship. And the destroyer I was on was a DDR. It was a radar ship more than weaponry. But we were at the mouth of the Saigon River firing away. And then we got orders to come out. And I'm not sure where we were exactly supposed to go. I heard it was Japan. And it was, okay, you know, whatever. And everybody was on a watch on the ship. We had 4-hour watches, you know. And the job I had was on the engine order telegraph, which is the thing you had to move the dials to full speed ahead or full speed back or whatever, you know, half speed. And it was a magnificently beautiful starlit night with a full moon. And you can't even imagine all the stars you could see because there's no lights. Mm-hmm. You know, everything was dark on the ship. And one of the watches up on the bridge yelled down about white water and breakers. It was like, what? You know, we're supposed to be out in the middle of the ocean. You don't have breakers, you know, like water hitting, you know, the shore and stuff. And the gentleman that was captain of the bridge at the time was a lieutenant commander, a reserve lieutenant commander. And his first thought was, well, if it really is a tidal wave, we should turn into it so that we could go up and over it. And so he ordered to turn the rudder and aim at it. And about a minute and a half later, the whole ship just sort of lifted up. And I'm on the engine order telegraph, and it's just sort of leaning on the thing. And the next thing I knew, I'm balancing on my elbow, my feet are off the floor, you know, because the whole ship went up and then dropped back down. And it's like, and I sort of fell, and I got back up, and then the next thing, we were doing probably about 14 knots, 15 knots, something like that. And the ship suddenly stopped dead in the water, just stopped. And I went right over the engine order telegraph. The guy that was on the steering wheel, for lack of another word, he got his arm stuck in the wheel and ended up spraining his shoulder or something. And everybody on the deck fell. And it's like 2:30 in the morning, you know, and it's like, and the ship's not moving. We just stopped dead in the water. It was like, okay. And the commander of the deck, the Lieutenant JG, he ordered all engines reverse. So I threw the engine, and we didn't move. We just sat there. You could hear it. Mm-hmm. You know, you could feel the vibration from the engines. And the next thing we knew, the captain was on the deck. The captain of our ship came up on the bridge, and he started screaming obscenities and throwing things around. And you could tell something's wrong here. And the next thing you know, the sun was coming up like 5 o'clock in the morning, 5:30 in the morning. And we realized at that point that we were stuck on a reef, a charted reef in the middle of the ocean.
Wow.
And it was like, okay. And there was, you could see, if you looked out, I don't remember which direction, but there was a very small island, and you could see a building on the island. And at sunup, they raised their flag, and it was a hammer and sickle, which is communist Russia. And it was like, oh my God, now what? Are we dead? You know, and all these people filed out of that building and are standing there looking at us with binoculars and things like this, and we're doing the same thing. And we're going, and the captain was frantic. He got on the radio and he was calling. The next thing you knew, we had, within probably a day, we had 2 destroyers, a cruiser, an aircraft carrier, and a tender, which is the kind of a ship that would, if something was wrong with yours, they would come fix it.
Mm-hmm.
And they all converged, and there were planes flying over, and it was like, we gonna live through this? You know? And we tried everything to get the ship off, put the engines in full reverse and everything else. That didn't work. And then they sent, the Prairie was, I don't remember their ship number, but they came out and they brought out 3 ocean-going tugboats.
Okay.
And what these tugboats did was they connected lines to the stern of our ship.
Mm-hmm.
And we're talking hawser lines. The rope was like 6 inches in diameter. Just huge stuff. It took like 5 guys to move this thing. And they had 3 tugboats on the stern of our ship, faced out, you know, one here, one here, one here. And they tried at full speed to pull us off the reef. And nothing happened. And that's when our captain just went nuts, because he knew he was in big trouble. And we on the 1MC, the loudspeaker system on the ship, they announced everyone attention on deck. Com 7th Fleet is aboard, which was the admiral in charge of the 7th Fleet. And he came on board our ship. And it was like, oh boy, now what? And he talked to the captain in his quarters for a few moments. And then within a day or so, they decided we had to offload all the excess weight on the ship, which meant everything from the captain's silverware to food and all the ammunition we had. We had a full load of ammunition aboard, which our ammunition included the 5-inch shells and the powder and a thing called hedgehogs, which were basically plastic anti-submarine explosives. And the Prairie brought a barge next to our ship, or they sent it over. And it was like, okay. So we started offloading with, you know, like 20 guys in a row, handed to the next one. And they started stacking all this munitions on this, I don't know what the hell you call it, barge, you know. Mm-hmm. And that was fine. We're all stacking up the stuff. And the water started getting real choppy. And when you're on a reef, when the water gets choppy, it's because there's a storm someplace. And so we were all told to batten down the hatches, blah, 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 that there was a tropical storm approaching. It's like, oh, okay, you know. And the barge, we must have had about 20 tons of ammunition on this thing, all stacked up nice and neat. Mm-hmm. And the water started getting real rough, and the barge started just going like this, sideways. And it kept banging into the side of our ship, and then it would go out and come back and bang into it. And I'm sitting there looking over the lines, watching 5-inch shells fall off into the water, and the powder fall off, and then the hedgehogs. And we had like a rope net between the two, just in case when they were handing it, something would drop. Well, some hedgehogs got caught in this, and the barge would go out and it'd slam into this hedgehog. And plastique is a very volatile explosive. And I'm watching this, and there was 3 of them stuck in this netting, and they kept getting smashed into the side of our ship. As like, and our, I'm trying to remember what his rank, he was a lieutenant or something, but he was the executive, or XO, the executive officer.
Mm-hmm.
He wasn't the captain, he was right under the captain. And my last name was Morosco. When I was in the service, everybody called me Ski, you know, short for your Polak. And he came over and he said, "Hey, Ski, everybody's running to the other side of the ship, you know, because these hedgehogs are there." And he said, "Aren't you afraid they're going to explode? And you want to be on the other side of the ship?" I said, "If they explode, being over on the other side of the ship, 30 feet away, is not going to save my life. We're all going to die. There's like tons of ammunition here. If it all went up, we're gone." And he kind of laughed, and we sat there and watched it. And that lasted for a day and a half. And nothing did explode. We were lucky. Then some guys decided, because they were on watch and you're off watch, we had the whole crew there, they started evacuating the crew. And the people that had to stay were the ones that were on watch when we hit the reef, because we had to stay for any court-martials, whatever. Mm-hmm. And well, I was on watch, so I had to stay, and some of the guys decided they wanted to go swimming. You know, it's tropical water, you know, blah, blah, blah. And so we had shark guards, just in case, which was guys with, you know, high-powered weapons. We had a BAR, we had pistols, and a couple machine guns. And all of a sudden, you know, there's like 5 or 6 guys. We had a little boat out, a little rowboat, and 5 or 6 guys swimming around. I wouldn't go in the water, I don't swim that well. And somebody yelled, "Shark." And we could see a fin cutting in towards the guys. So all of us, I had a BAR. I had never fired this kind of a weapon. And you see in the movies, the macho movies, Arnold Schwarzenegger, he would have his hand on the top of it, and he, you know, holding it down. You can't put your hand on top of a BAR, it'll burn you, because the barrel gets so hot. Okay. And you know, I fired probably about 10 shots out of this thing. It just rode right up in the air. The recoil on the thing was so much. And the guys got back in the little boat, rowboat, and came back on the ship. Nobody got hurt. And we did end up, somebody shot the shark. I don't know who. And of course there was blood in the water. And the next thing you knew, there was a food fight between other sharks and the barracuda that were there over the carcass of the dead shark. And so we watched this, like, oh, okay, you know. We had no movies. Yeah. We had no power on our ship, so we had no refrigerators, so we had no food, because everything spoiled. Mm-hmm. So I can remember the last meal that I had out of our stuff was sort of room temperature, something that resembled bologna. And you know, that didn't last long with anybody. And then the Prairie started sending over food to us. Mm-hmm. You know, they bring it over on this little barge. And another storm was coming, and the Prairie did not want to be part of this holy mess. So they started to leave, but they only had one engine. So they're chugging away, and we're watching it go away, and we're thinking, what are we going to eat? We have no food. You know, nobody really cared. Mm-hmm. And the next thing you know, they sent out a group of the forerunners of the SEALs. They were UDT people, underwater demolition. Mm-hmm. And their commanding officer was Lieutenant Commander Naylor. And, well, he sent these divers down. What their plan was to put explosives on the reef under the ship and detonate them, maybe to destroy the reef. And you know, they announced over our loudspeaker system and stuff, you know, to hang on or whatever they said, and they ignited the explosives. and our whole ship lifted up out of the water, and it just dropped down. And what they did was, we found out later, instead of detonating the reef, they blew out about 18 feet of keel, which is the main structure underneath the ship to hold it together.
Okay.
And that was underneath the forward engine room and fire room. And it was like, and we started taking out water in this thing. Well, we couldn't sink, we're already on the reef. But it was like, no, what are we gonna do? You know, and he got nicknamed Boom Boom Nailer for this, and he was so, everybody kind of ragged on him, and he sort of got out of there. And the next thing you know, they figured out a high tide period. And in that area, high tide was not a lot of high tide, but it was high tide. So they had a tugboat on the back end with chains connected to our ship. And what they were going to do as soon as high tide came, they were going to start pulling and see if they could pull us off the reef. Well, I was in my bunk asleep, and I heard over the loudspeaker system, the Knox is afloat, which meant they pulled us off the reef. We were there for 58 days.
Wow.
You know, this wasn't an overnight experience. And I saw all kinds of stuff. And when they pulled us off the reef, that's when everybody discovered that under the forward engine room and fire room, we had nothing. There was a big hole in the bottom of the ship. And we started to sink. You know, and it's like, okay. And they brought out some kind of a ship. I have no idea what it was or whatever. But they filled the forward engine room and fire room from the top with styrofoam, sprayed it in, you know, and that would maybe, you know, chase the water. Well, it did. And so we didn't sink. And so we were being towed back end first. And where are we going? You know, everybody started asking questions. And we discovered we were going to Taiwan. Oh, okay. So they towed us into Taiwan, ASEAN first. And yeah, that was embarrassing, as you know, for all of us. You know, ships don't come in backwards, you know. And then we're in Taiwan, and they put us in a dry dock. And then they pumped all the water out. And we got to, actually, a couple of us got to go down in the dry dock and see the hole in the bottom of the ship, which was fabulous, you know, and all chewed up metal and everything. Mm-hmm. And they had all these Taiwanese people starting to work on our ship. They had to rebuild the whole bottom of the ship. And so they were doing a lot of welding of steel. And well, styrofoam with a welding gun catches on fire. And so I'm standing on watch, and our watch consisted of standing where the gangplank was to go to shore. And, you know, anybody wanted to come aboard, we had to, you know, see their ID or if we knew them or whatever. And the next thing you know, I turned around and looked, and somebody is yelling out, "Black on one," which meant the forward engine room, maybe the engine was running and the smoke was coming out the stack. Well, the engine wasn't running, and that was a styrofoam that was on fire. And so the very next day in the morning, all of us had to go to the medical facility because inhaling the smoke from burning styrofoam is toxic. And well, one guy got sick, but you know, none of us were medicated for it or anything. We had our lungs x-rayed and all that happy stuff, and we were fine to go. And then after being in Taiwan for about 3.5 months, they finally got the bottom of the ship fixed. And so we got towed to Japan. And we went to, I believe it was Yokohama, Japan. It was the big naval base. And we got towed in there, and they put the ship in dry dock there. And all of us that were on watch were the ones that had to stay. We were witnesses in all the court martials. And we had found out at that time the quartermaster, he was a second class with about 15 or 16 years in the service. You know, a second class is
Mm-hmm.
pretty high position,
Yeah.
enlisted. Well, he got court-martialed because what he did, they had, you take Loran readings, which they were different satellite. Today it's satellites, but I don't know how. You know, there were base things that would give out signals, electronic
Mm-hmm.
signals, and they would pick it up. And when the coordinates crossed, then they could figure out where the ship was. You know, when you're out at sea. Well, it turned out he took the Loran readings, knew about Pratis Island and Pratis Reef, and instead of telling somebody we're way off course, he just tore the page out of the book, but he didn't destroy it. He put it in the back of another book, and somebody found it. And so he went from a second class quartermaster to a seaman recruit, which is the rank you get, or rate, it's a rate actually, when you go to boot camp, which is the bottom of the barrel. And he had been making a whole bunch of money, you know, each month, blah, blah, blah.
Mm-hmm.
And they sentenced him to, I think it was 10 years hard labor at the military prison in Japan. And a couple of us were walking by. You could walk by the outside of the prison. I mean, it was all chain link fence and all that kind of stuff. And we could see our previous quartermaster, and he was in there with about 20 other guys doing push-ups. And they had 2 Marine DIs, which were Marines who were a little from kind of getting screwed up when they were in Vietnam.
Mm-hmm.
So they were the prison guards, and these guys were kind of off in their own little world. And they had everybody doing push-ups, and I saw our quartermaster, he missed a push-up, and 2 Marine guards came in on him, just started beating the snot out of him with batons until he started doing push-ups again. I thought, oh boy, you know, and I had to go to one other court-martial and testify what happened to me, and that was our captain, and he was demoted, and his commission to be a captain of a ship was removed, and I don't know whatever happened to him. They sent him back to the States, that's all I knew.
Mm-hmm.
And here we're still in Japan, and it's like, okay. And in between, I would call home every now and then. There was phones you could call collect, and I had a girlfriend here, and we decided, let's get married. Okay. So we're chit-chatting on the phone, and this is like outrageous amounts of money, $5, $6, $7 a minute to call.
Wow.
You know, so I ran my parents' phone bill up through the ceiling, you know, and so this young lady and I decided, okay, we're going to get married in 2 months from now, and this